every news story, there is more.
So we can write the best security architecture plan, but it remains an essay until it becomes manifest on ground.
More detail.
Every time you are doing reform, even when we were doing it 2006, 2007, the question is also that it's not the right time. When will be the right time?
More than just the headline. This is News Extra on Radio Now 95.3 FM.
Hello and welcome to News Extra on your Beyond the News station, Radio Now 95.3 FM, Lagos. My name is Stephen Imediegu. Today on News Extra, our focus is on the Middle East and more specifically the escalation of tensions between Israel and Iran, which has seen bombings and counter-bombings on both nations. In the last few hours, we've seen a worsening of the conflict, or indeed a widening of it, as Yemen's Houthi rebels have launched attacks on Israel, which detonated over the occupied West Bank. Joining us to speak on this, its escalation as well as the genesis of the conflict, is Irina Sukuman. Ms. Irina Sukuman is an international affairs commentator who has a particular focus as well on security in the Middle East. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on News Extra, Ms. Sukuman.
Good morning, and I'm very glad to be here.
Could you talk to us about what's going on at the moment between Israel and Iran? We have seen reports of attacks over the week, and in this weekend in particular, the escalation of the conflict itself. Can you give us a rundown of events as they are at the moment?
Well, it all started when Israel launched a series of attacks on military and nuclear sites in Iran, as well as attacks both on the ground and strikes against nuclear scientists and a group of RGC personnel, as well as a senior advisor to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is the supreme leader of Iran. This was in response to reports that Iran was not only producing enough nuclear material to create 50 nuclear bombs, but it was likely to run tests for its nuclear program in the near future. And if those bombs became operational, there was a chance of a serious attack on Israel's soil. So it was a preemptive attack to put an end to the nuclear program. President Donald Trump told Israel not to assassinate the supreme leader, who eventually went to hide in a bunker somewhere in the middle of the country. He called on Iran after the initial strike to come back to the negotiation table. On Sunday, we were supposed to have the sixth round of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, but Iran refused to engage and said that it would not be participating in talks in the middle of the war. Instead, it launched over 150 air attack missiles on Israel, causing infrastructure damage and injuries, and later, in further attacks, it also led to terminal casualties. It killed a group of people and damaged a lot of infrastructure in major urban areas in Israel. Israel continued its series of attacks, damaging the Natanz nuclear facility. It also attacked several other nuclear facilities, which are very difficult to get to without a very serious Air Force backup, because some of them are located deeply underground and even under mountains. All of Israel's strikes were precision strikes aimed at military or security sites and government buildings, and aimed to minimize any civilian casualties. And it also attacked the Houthi leadership, leading to the death of Mohammed al-Amri, who is the second in command in the Houthi leadership. The rest, as far as I know, have survived. Over 20 nuclear scientists and military commanders have been killed so far, including the top advisor to Ali Khamenei, Ali Shamkhani, who was also one of the architects of Iran's nuclear diplomatic and political posture, including during the past and current negotiations.
Now, we have seen responses to Israel's opening of the conflicts against Iran and targeting Yemen's Houthi rebels. And that response has seen Iran fire back on Israel. We've also seen the Houthis fire on Israel as well. Can you give us a sense of what is going on in Israel with these responses. The Air Dome has been touted several times as being sufficient to protect Israelis from attacks from within the region. Is that the case, or have the attacks seen a worsening of what's going on in the Middle East?
Well, according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, Iran was about to transfer some of the nuclear material to the Houthis. Had that been the case, that would have been a disastrous outcome. Houthis are not only aggressive Iranian proxies, but completely unreliable actors that make Al-Qaeda seem strategic and trustworthy by comparison. They are quite radical, and they even boast of being more radical than Iran itself in terms of their regional activities. So that was a serious threat, and if these strikes at least prevented that from happening, that's already a major victory. But they've done a lot more than that. They've clearly disrupted and set back the nuclear program. They dealt a severe conventional military blow, significantly degrading Iranian capacities and making it much more difficult for Iran to attack anyone in the region and not just Israel, and also sent a very significant deterrence message to Iranian proxies such as the remnants of Hezbollah, which apparently has not come to regime's rescue. We also know that Iran has repeatedly tried to push for talks with Israel through various countries and to put an end to attacks on its territory. So we know that these attacks have been actually purposefully done and quite effective. Life in Israel remains relatively normal during the day. At night, parts of the country are, of course, suffering from the missiles attacks, and there's repeated disruption because people have to run into shelters, and anyone on the street, can be easily targeted. There have been some air defense failures, but overall it has been relatively effective at protecting civilian lives, if not the infrastructure. But of course, Iran has a very significant amount of missiles that it's ready to launch, and without international backing and shooting down those drones and missiles, it's going to be difficult to maintain the same level of air defense superiority that Israel has up until this point.
So we have seen air attacks from both sides, and you've also pointed to ground attacks by the Israel Defense Forces. Is there a possibility of Iran and Yemen's Houthi rebels actually engaging in ground assaults on Israeli territory?
Houthis are too far away from Israel to be able to launch any ground assaults, and Iran's military is quite weak, which is why Iran has always primarily relied on missile programs and on proxies to attack Israel or other countries. Its conventional military is not up to the par, and the RGC forces, which have engaged in asymmetrical warfare, have been essentially decapitated of all of their leadership at this moment. Both Tier 1 and Tier 2 of RGC leadership have been taken out. Also, the senior head of Iranian intelligence has also been killed in Israeli airstrikes. What's even more interesting is that there has been a tremendous intelligence failure on Iran's part. Israel's penetration includes having built a drone base at the heart of Iran, close to a military base there. So some of the drones Israel has been firing are actually coming from Iran itself, not from Iraq or any nearby countries, which is a very shocking development. This operation was apparently planned for 20 years, of course, with updates to more recent movements by the Iranian leadership. But it's very clear that it has that Israel has not only penetrated the Iranian and political and RGC echelons through spies and human intelligence, but that even after the failures related to the Hezbollah operation, the Pager operation, Iran has not been able to recover and to identify all of the individuals allegedly cooperating with Israel.
So, as we wrap this conversation, the United States is typically an ally of Israel in the Middle East, and they have been very vehement in terms of their support of Israel since the 7th of October 2023. Now, in these latest incidents, we do know that they were engaged in conversations with Iran about scaling back their nuclear program. And then a few days ago, we saw them pull out non-essential personnel from the Middle East. What is the view from the U.S.? What are they saying regarding the conflict? And are we getting to the point where we could see U.S. boots on ground in the Middle East?
The Trump administration was very much against Israel launching any attacks on nuclear sites until the negotiations led to a conclusive failure, but they were very much going in that direction. Iran was, even as Trump himself admitted, wasting time and getting closer and closer to that nuclear threshold. Israel deceived everyone except for the United States by basically claiming that they would wait until the end of the sixth round to see what happens. And it was uncertain whether they would actually launch the operation, because a lot would have depended on what Iran would do. But Iran clearly had no intention of ending its nuclear program or dismantling anything. In fact, all signs from the intelligence were pointing to it going in the opposite direction. Obviously, Israel coordinated with the U.S. to keep U.S. troops out of danger zone, which is why U.S. acted the way it did, sending a signal that it was expecting a likely escalation. But Israel at that point has made up its mind to strike no matter what happened. And before the sixth round, because of the immediacy of the threat, despite some pushback from the administration. However, once that was decided, there was literally no option but to coordinate to ensure the safety of all involved. I do not expect U.S. presence on the ground unless U.S. presence in Iraq or elsewhere is deliberately targeted by the proxies or by Iran itself, which they would probably avoid doing because U.S. forces are quite formidable. Especially compared to the Iranian current situation. U.S. is expected to provide logistical and intelligence support, but and perhaps they can assist with coordinating the defensive drone operations to ensure that the drones do not target on the defensive side, but offensively I don't expect U.S. to intervene, as I said, unless they themselves are targeted. Israel did want to see U.S. Air Force backing in attacking the nuclear sites, but so far that has not been on the table. The situation, however, could change if Iran is so significantly weakened that essentially finishing off those nuclear sites will be seen as having virtually no resistance from the remnants of the Iranian Air Force or its proxies, and that could very well come to that point. Iran has not backed down from further attacks despite the rapid degradation of its forces, and it could be that its leadership can end up in such a weak spot that they are forced to flee the country altogether if they are not assassinated before that.
Finally, Ms. Sukerman, we've heard talks about peace. Mediators have gotten involved in this particular conversation. Is it too early to expect the combatants to lay down their arms, or is there any progress being made towards scaling back the level of this conflict?
There have been multiple negotiation efforts, but as far as Israel is concerned, so long as Iran continues attacking civilian centers, there can be no ceasefire. And the more Israel degrades Iran's capacities, the less reason there is to really stop and not do as much damage as possibly could be done to set back Iran's capacity to launch conventional or nuclear attacks. Decades and the Iranian regime was already quite weak before the start of the U.S. talks. Essentially, reports that from the intelligence were pointing out that the regime was, after the Hezbollah attacks, was on the verge of collapse. This extremely strong attack by Israel could be the beginning of the end, politically speaking, inside the country. If the military views the regime as hopeless, and if they see that their that there is no salvaging the situation, they could simply turn against their own authorities and essentially take power for themselves, along with the remnants of the RGC contingent and whoever is left, or they could simply massively abandon positions and flee. It has not yet come to the point, and the regime is still trying to remain in power, politically speaking, at least, but militarily, I think it will be significantly weakened and quite easy to pressure in the near future, even at this point.
Ms. Sukuman, thank you very much for your time and expertise on this conversation. Irina Sukuman is a Middle East security analyst who joined us on the conversation to speak on the escalation of tensions between Israel and Iran. Over the last few days, we have seen an exchange of missiles from Israel to Iran, which targeted members of the Iranian High Command as well as nuclear scientists. These attacks have seen a response from Iran with airstrikes targeting Tel Aviv and the Houthi rebels in Yemen, whose airstrikes have fallen on the occupied West Bank. That's News Extra on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. As always, we ask that you stay tuned to your Beyond the News station. I'm Stephen Imediegu.